The bye weeks are here. This is every single wide receiver to start or sit in fantasy football, starting with tonight's game where we actually have a lot of injuries with Ricky Pearsall as of today on Wednesday not practicing, and then Juwan Jennings also not practicing. If both of those guys don't play, there's not really a wide receiver in this offense I want to start. I think it would be fool's gold to try to do it. I think they'll just run their offense through Christian McCaffrey a lot. So if those guys aren't good to go, you're probably not starting any wide receivers in the San Francisco offense this week. On the other side of the ball with the Rams, Puka and Devontae Adams, obviously you feel better about starting these guys from a matchup perspective. The San Francisco 49ers have allowed the fifth least amount of points to running backs, so a good matchup. The Vegas light is green for them. The offense light is obviously green for those guys. And so Puka's obviously, in the S tier. He's the wide receiver one. He's a must start. Devontae Adams is in the B tier, though, and you can't really sit Devontae Adams in any matchup right now. And so both these guys are going to be must starts for us this week in a tougher matchup, but they're going to probably produce, if I had to guess, in Thursday Night Football for the game tonight. And so we're starting Puka, we're starting Devontae Adams. The 49ers guys are going to be really risky for this week if they do end up playing.
Yeah, then we have Minnesota and Cleveland. Obviously, Addison is back for the Vikings, and as long as Carson Wentz is starting there and throwing the ball 35-plus times a game, I do think that makes Jefferson and Addison both viable starting options. Addison specifically, obviously, you're starting Jefferson every single week. He's in the A tier. Had a nice 22-point performance last week against Pittsburgh. Now they're in London this week. I think he'll be fine in a neutral matchup against Cleveland's passing defense. Cleveland and their defense, again, is going to be one of the better ones in the league, but specifically against the run, they're really good at keeping anybody from getting explosive plays on the ground. And Jordan Mason, after a tough game last week against Pittsburgh, I think is going to continue his struggles this week against Cleveland, and they're really going to have to air it out if they want to have success against this defense. So Addison we will have listed in the D tier, and with 4 teams on bye this week, again, you're probably going to be forced to start a guy like Addison anyways. Then on the flip side, Judy and Isaiah Bond are looking to be your top guys in the depth chart there. Bond had a nice showing last week. He had 6 targets, I believe, and was the most productive wide receiver there. And Judy has just not been consistent with Joe Flacco at the helm. Now, Dylan Gabriel is actually going to be the QB this week, or the starting QB for Cleveland this week. And while I think there's a possibility that he could, offer a spark for that offense and maybe have a couple of good plays, I don't trust anyone in that offense to be productive outside of Quinshon Judkins on a consistent basis. Even during bye weeks, I'm avoiding starting either of them because you're looking at the worst possible matchup for wide receivers in the NFL right now. Through 4 weeks, Minnesota has allowed the least amount of points to wide receivers, and I don't expect that to get any better on one of the worst passing offenses in the NFL.
All right, going to the Houston-Baltimore game now. Pretty interesting one here because when you're talking about the Baltimore Ravens, obviously this team is absolutely cheeks against fantasy football wide receivers. They've allowed the 5th most points to wide receivers so far in fantasy football. So Nico's going to be in the A tier. He's going to be a must-start, of course, for us. Christian Kirk, I'm actually going to have as a meh this week. Somebody's going to get more targets than normal and more production than normal this week. And if you think that's going to be Christian Kirk, I'm okay plugging him into lineups. We've got him in the G tier for this week. But with Kirk, again, against this Ravens defense, you see it pretty much every week. There's a secondary wide receiver on teams that kind of get some fantasy productive points. So A tier for Nico, G tier for Christian Kirk. On the Baltimore side of the ball, the matchup isn't as friendly. Houston's much better against fantasy football wide receivers, but Zay Flowers, obviously no Lamar in this game from what it sounds like, and so Zay Flowers is going to be bumped down in the C tier for us this week, and I'm going to have Zay as a start. I still think you start Zay. There was a drive last week where later in the game, and it was garbage time, so it kind of inflated Zay's stats. He didn't really do anything until garbage time. But there was a drive where Cooper Rush targeted him 5 times in a row. And so, if anything, I do think he's going to get enough targets to probably put together a flex level game. And so I'm going to say start on a week where we have 4 bye weeks. I don't think you can afford to sit Zay, even though it's not ideal without Lamar. And then Rashad Bateman I'm going to have as a sit. Again, this is the type of guy I don't expect. I mean, it's always possible, but I don't expect Cooper Rush to support Rashad Bateman being productive here. Same kind of goes with D-Hop, but Rashad Bateman we're going to have in the H tier for this week. Again, a little bit of a tougher matchup for these Baltimore guys. They're going without Lamar, so you don't feel as good about any of the wide receiver 2s, but you are going to still start Zay because we do have bye weeks and you probably can't afford to sit Zay Flowers at this point.
So next matchup is going to be Miami and Carolina. Interestingly enough, Carolina has allowed the 2nd least amount of points to fantasy wide receivers this season. Obviously, a lot of that was how locked down they were against Atlanta, specifically shutting them out in that one game. But with Waddle, we're ranking him in the C tier this week because he's pretty much the only guy left there now that Tyreek Hill goes down with that injury. You want to see his volume go up. Hopefully it will, but definitely going to list him as a must start against Carolina, even in a tougher matchup. We'll see what his upside could be when he's going to be the primary recipient of targets. Beyond that, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, Malik Washington, like none of those guys you're really trusting until they show that they can do anything whatsoever in that offense. On the flip side, Carolina, same tier as Jalen Waddle this week. This is a much friendlier matchup for him. On the flip side here, he's been getting consistent target volume. He's just got to take it to the house at some point for him to kind of raise his ceiling. He's, again, 11, 16, 7, and 10 points as a rookie, getting plenty of work, plenty of targets, 9, 10, and 8 targets over the first 4 weeks of the season. I'd expect that volume to continue with a wide receiver core that's honestly in shambles right now. A lot of injuries there. Coker's out. Leggett is out. Renfro may be banged up as well. So just not looking good at the wide receiver position outside of Tet, which I do think results in him getting pretty much all of the receiving work aside from what the tight ends are going to get there.
Moving to the Indianapolis-Las Vegas game, Jacoby Myers is going to be a start for us against an Indianapolis defense that's allowed the fourth most amount of points to wide receivers this year. Look, Jacoby Myers has not been good recently. I bet he has a bounce back against Indy. I just do. Their secondary has been banged up all year. You saw the Rams absolutely abuse that Colts secondary. Lou Anarumo, looks like he doesn't ever know how to coach defense, to be honest with you. As a Colts fan, I'm just kind of frustrated. Trey Tucker, not going to start. The dev team made the mistake of starting Trey Tucker against me last week in the Flock League. Look, Trey Tucker, I don't think what he did at the beginning of the season was like a total fluke, but it was kind of a fluke. And to the point where I don't think Trey Tucker is somebody you can start on a consistent basis. And even though it's a decent matchup, I'm not really going to look to start Trey Tucker in this game because I think it could be any of those receiving assets that go off against Indianapolis. So C tier for Jacoby Myers and F tier for Trey Tucker on the Indianapolis side of the ball. Another good matchup because Las Vegas is actually worse than the Colts. They've allowed the third most points to fantasy football wide receivers. Michael Pittman, in that case, is probably going to be a start for us. The thing about Michael Pittman is he scored a touchdown in 3 of his first 4 games. It's still, I think he still has a high floor. He had 10 targets in the last game, which is great. This is an offense that obviously looks much better than we thought they would. But at this point, with Michael Pittman, there is going to be some regression, I think, when he stops scoring the touchdowns, if I'm assuming that happens. He is still somebody, I think, in a decent matchup that I'm going to start and put him in the C tier for this week. And then Josh Downs. I'm going to have Josh Downs as a meh. He's been hit or miss, but last game you saw some signs of life for Josh Downs, which is great.
Because Pierce was out.
And he had 5 targets, but he only had 6 points. Yeah. So even though it felt like he was more involved in the passing game there, it didn't necessarily translate to fantasy production. Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm at with Josh Downs right now. I'm going to have him as a meh. I don't really want to start him. We've got him in the H tier. Again, good matchups for both of these guys. I just feel a little bit shakier with the wide receiver 2s in this matchup. And so C tier for both the starting guys, and then F and H tier for Trey Tucker and Josh Downs in this one.
Yeah, then looking at the Giants and the Saints, going to be one of the uglier games of the week in the NFC. You got Wan'Dale Robinson as the new lead wide receiver for the Giants, taking the place of Malik Neighbors. And look, I say that kind of as a joke because I don't think that he's going to just automatically take all the targets that Malik Neighbors was commanding in that offense. At the end of the day, this is just going to be a worse passing offense than it was with a guy like Neighbors. And Wan'Dale's ceiling is still going to be capped compared to what Neighbors offered there. Same with Darius Slayton, who's behind him. But Wan'Dale we will have listed as a start. Again, with all these bye weeks right now, he's a viable option that should, out of the slot, get a decent amount of targets in the D tier, and then Darius Slayton in the F tier. We'll have listed as a meh this week. He's had, in years past, productive weeks when other receivers in front of him had gone down. I kind of view him as a Rashid Shaheed type of guy, who we're actually going to talk about in this matchup as well. But he'll be in the F tier here with some big playability. Shaheed, again, on the flip side, in the G tier. He actually kind of got some work vultured from Brandon Cooks, who is still in the league. We have him in the I tier. Cooks got some work last week. I don't think he's going to get as much this week. It is a nice, friendly matchup for wide receivers against the Giants, who have allowed the second most amount of points to wide receivers in fantasy this season. But Shaheed, I'm going to list as a meh in the G tier, and Chris Olave in the C tier as a must start. He finally got a touchdown last week, but didn't get the target volume that he was getting for the first 3 weeks. So what's it going to be? When is he going to get both? I don't know. Maybe this offense just sucks. But again, regardless, with him being the number one option there, you do have to start him.
Yeah, moving to the Dallas game. Obviously, George Pickens is going to be in the A tier. Like, he was incredible last week. And so with as much as that offense is going to be passing the ball as well, it's a great offense to buy into in fantasy football right now. I mean, Pickens is going to be ranked in the second tier of our rankings pretty much until CeeDee Lamb comes back. Now, I am going to put Jalen Tolbert as a meh this week. He's only rostered in 16% of sleeper leagues, but he had 10 points last week. And again, I do think this is an offense that's going to pass the ball a lot. Obviously, if you have better options, I wouldn't recommend starting Tolbert, who we have in the G tier. But I do think he's somebody that if you are like really, really down and you have a ton of guys on bye week, like Danny's team in the Flock League, where he has literally no starters, Tolbert's actually a guy you can plug in at that point. And so I'll have him in the G tier. Kevontae Turpin, I'll put in the H tier. Turpin had some big plays last week, but didn't actually have that many fantasy points. So again, decent matchup. The Jets actually are, kind of middle of the pack right now in terms of allowing fantasy points. It's going to be a little bit tougher for Pickens, but again, that is kind of offset by the fact that Pickens had 40 points last week, and so you have to start him. On the New York side of the ball, this is actually a very good matchup for New York because we know that the Dallas Cowboys are going to allow the second most amount of points this year so far to fantasy football wide receivers. The reason Dallas constantly throws the ball is because they are constantly in shootouts with teams because they cannot play defense. And so for New York, Garrett Wilson, A tier with George Pickens, and is a must-start for us this week. And then after that, of course, you don't have anybody in New York you can start, really. Justin Fields will probably be a very good start this week for a quarterback, but, you don't really want to start Josh Reynolds in this game. And so Pickens and Wilson going to be A tier guys for us. We'll have Jalen Tolbert as a flex guy if you really need him. And the rest of the guys, Devontae Turpin and Josh Reynolds, we're going to have as sits for this matchup.
So Denver and Philly is going to be a fun one to watch this week. We got Cortland Sutton as a wide receiver 1 for Denver, and he's just been very, very productive aside from like one dud where Troy Franklin went nuts. We're going to have Sutton in the B tier. He's very consistent. Troy Franklin, who I just mentioned, going to be in the F tier this week. He had a 9-target game against Cincinnati, and that's kind of why I'm going to lean more on the side of like, hey, let's sit Troy Franklin if we can help it this week. He had 9 targets against the Colts, 4 targets against the Chargers, 8 targets against Cincinnati. You see a trend there, right? The better passing defenses are probably not going to allow a guy like Troy Franklin to work them all day long. So against Philly, who has one of the better defenses in the NFL, I don't think you're going to see much from him this week. Same with Marvin Mims. Not going to be a lot of explosive plays. A.J. Brown in the B tier, same as Cortland Sutton. Got to start him. It is a tough matchup going up against Denver's passing D. We'll see who ends up lining up against him in the secondary, but he's going to be boom bust, but you still have to start him. Same with Devonta Smith. Both of these guys, it depends on if Philly's going to get the lead here early. If it ends up being a close game and maybe they're down by a possession or like 3-7 points, something like that, heading into the second half, you're going to see Hurts air it out a little bit more, which is really, really helpful for guys like Brown and Devonta Smith to produce. So TBD on both of these guys in terms of obviously their production outlook. I would guess one of them will probably disappoint because that's what we usually see, but there's no reason to not start both of them this week.
Tampa Bay Seattle game here. Emeka Egbuka is going to be in the B tier for us, of course. You're starting him every week at this point. And Chris Godwin, and a tough matchup against Seattle. Seattle has allowed the second least amount of points to wide receivers this year, so it's actually a tough matchup for Egbuka and tough matchup for Godwin as you kind of have the Legion of Boom reincarnated here. But with Chris Godwin, D tier for Chris Godwin this week. He's climbing for us. Like, he's to the point now where it's like the more he starts playing, the more he's going to be startable. And you saw him in his first game back last week with 10 targets on 81% snap share. 10 times. He's going to start bringing more of those in than just 3 of them. And so be prepared for that. And even though it's a tougher matchup against Seattle, I am going to put Chris Godwin as a start this week. Sterling Shepard, somebody we're not starting. Also a tough matchup for the Seattle Seahawks. Tampa Bay allowed the 6th least amount of points so far to fantasy football wide receivers. Jackson Smith-Njigba going to be in the A tier. He's a top 12 wide receiver so far this year. Very, very good. Cooper Kupp in the G tier. Cooper Kupp, I think in this matchup, we have him in the G tier. I'm going to put as a meh. I will say, I think of all games where you could potentially start Cooper Kupp, it probably would be against Tampa Bay because Tampa Bay is going to be scoring a ton of points in this game. And so I feel a little bit more comfortable flexing him. I don't feel super comfortable flexing Torrey Horton in this game. But either way, you're looking at this matchup, and it's a tough matchup for both sides, but it should be a fairly high-scoring game, and so it makes these wide receivers a little bit more appealing here.
So Tennessee and Arizona probably going to be ugly as well. You've got Alec Iamander at this point, who we're listing as a wide receiver 1 there because he's just straight up outproducing, outworking Calvin Ridley right now. He will be in the D tier in a matchup that is pretty neutral against Arizona. They allow a decent amount of production to wide receivers. We'll see what he can do this week. In the D tier, we're going to list him as a meh. Honestly, this is kind of an upside ranking for Alec Iamander. I think you know what his floor is, though, in an offense that literally cannot produce. You don't feel good about starting either of these guys in Tennessee with Ridley, but I feel better about Alec than I do with Ridley, who we now have in the G tier because he's just straight up not scoring any points. Marvin Harrison Jr. on the other side is going to be listed as a must start in a great matchup for wide receivers going up against Tennessee. He had a solid game last week. It was kind of a Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing with the first half versus the second half, and just not. I don't know. What Marv are we going to see this week? Are we going to see drops? Are we going to see really good contested catches and touchdowns? Like, I really don't know. Michael Wilson is going to be listed as a sit for sure. We don't even have him ranked here. So that is a nice thing for Marv. I do want to note that with Trey Benson going down at running back, they now have no Connor, no Benson, and it's going to be like DeMarcado and Michael Carter there at running back. So if they can't get anything done in the run game, they're going to have to air it out this game, I would assume, and that would bode well for both Marv and Trey McBride.
It's a great matchup for Detroit this week. Amon-Ra in the S tier and Jameson Williams in the C tier this week. Both of these guys are going to be must-starts for us in a game against Cincinnati, where Cincinnati, obviously, their defense is legitimately, historically terrible. And so you are going to start both these receivers, even though Jameson Williams has been a little bit disappointing for you this year. I think you still got to do it, right? On the Cincinnati side of the ball, tougher matchup, 12th least amount of points to fantasy football wide receivers the Detroit Lions have allowed this year. And so with Jamar, I mean, it's very clear. You know, we heard kind of a narrative opposite of this before Jake Browning came in. And obviously it's been terrible for Chase and it's been terrible for Higgins. And you know, it's been really two tough matchups for Chase against Minnesota and then against Pat Surtain in week 4. But in terms of the utilization here, we heard that T. Higgins was going to be able to produce and get more utilization with Jake Browning because that's what we saw in 2023. And it's just not, it's apples and oranges, you guys. Jamar Chase, since Jake Browning took over in the last 2 games, 14 targets to T. Higgins 8 and 10 receptions to T. Higgins 4. And so Jamar Chase is going to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense, no matter which way you frame it. So he's going to be a start for us in the B tier. T. Higgins in the D tier is going to be a meh for us. It's a tougher matchup. And frankly, I mean, the 2 games that we've seen, T. Higgins with Jake Browning, 2 and 6 points. Like that, you don't really want to start that. And I don't necessarily think in these next 2 matchups against Detroit and Green Bay that it's going to be much better. And so if you can afford to sit T. Higgins, I'm probably sitting T. Higgins. Obviously, he's T. Higgins, so you know he might be the best guy on your team. You might not have any available guys because we have 4 teams on bye. But I just want to give you a heads up. It's a tough matchup, and he hasn't been producing. I think Jamar, you still have to start. Look, Jamar's going to have big games eventually. We just got to guess when they are. You really can't take Jamar out of your lineup for that reason. And when he's not having huge games, he's having 7 to 8 point games, which is fine. Like, that's not going to lose you a matchup most likely. It's not going to win you a league like you thought Jamar was going to, so that it hurts your team overall. But week to week, you still have to put him in your lineups because of the overall upside that he has. And so it should be a good matchup for fantasy football purposes, as the Detroit Lions should come out swinging and score a lot of points early, and then Cincinnati should be playing catch up, and these wide receivers should have a lot of volume after that.
So we got Washington and the Chargers. This should be a fun one with Jaden Daniels coming back healthy. He is expected to play. Deebo Samuel going to be in the B tier here, listed as a wide receiver 1, but I will note that Terry McLaurin, according to Dan Quinn, is trending up for week 5. Does that mean he's actually going to start? Does that mean he's going to be a full go? Will he be limited? We don't really know. So just keep that in mind. We're going to operate under the assumption that he's not going to play for now, but if he continues to trend up or trend in the right direction to play, then you're starting both Deebo and Terry McLaurin. I don't think there's any reason to knock Deebo Samuel for Terry coming back after he missed a couple games with a knee injury. I just think the upside for both of these guys with Daniels back healthy will be nice and good enough where you can start both of them. Luke McCaffrey has only been producing because Terry has been out. He gets no volume. He got touchdowns 2 weeks in a row. You're sitting him. On the flip side, you got the Chargers. Got to figure this out again. Outside of QJ, QJ's a must start every single week from here on out. Boom. Keenan Allen is going to be in the B tier, and Lab McConkey we're going to have in the D's tier. I don't think we have to rationalize this at this point. Lab McConkey is the least productive wide receiver in this offense. I will say, though, I'm going to list every single one of them as starts this week because, number 1, we have a ton of buys going on, and number 2, this is a very, very good matchup for every single one of these wide receivers to produce. With Daniels coming back, I would expect the Chargers would have to air it out for them to kind of stay up with the high levels of production that we could potentially see in this matchup. And Washington has allowed the 8th most amount of points to fantasy wide receivers this season. Lab McConkey is flexible this week because he could be the guy that gets the touchdown. As if he gets the touchdown, then Keenan's going to be the odd man out. If Keenan gets the touchdown, Lab will probably be the odd man out. Regardless, we know QJ will probably do well, and then it's Keenan and then Lad starting all of them, and then going to the next matchup.
Yeah, New England versus Buffalo here. Look, on the New England side of the ball, do you really want to start any of these guys? Not unless you have to. And so none of these guys are going to be must-starts. Diggs did have a decent week last week because he had 16 points. He had 7 targets, 6 receptions, 101 yards. Maybe he picks it up and we're like, yeah, we can maybe start Stephon Diggs. But he's a meh for us at best this week in the F tier. Kayshawn Boutte in the I tier. Look, Bootie's consistently, his points have just dropped from week 1. I'm so glad I got QJ instead of him in the Flock League at this point. But I tier for Kayshawn Boutte, and you're sitting him. On the other side of the ball, Buffalo, both these are mediocre matchups, by the way, mostly yellow lights in this game. The Vegas light is green for Buffalo, and so with that, Shakir and Coleman are going to be in the D tier, both of them. But I'm going to do this, because even though they're in the same tier for us analytically and from a projection standpoint, I'm more comfortable starting Khalil Shakir than I am Keon Coleman right now. And so I'm going to say Khalil Shakir is going to be a start, and I'm going to say Keon Coleman is going to be a meh for us. Right now, that's just going off of my own gut, really. I just feel more comfortable if I have to decide. I feel like I can plug Khalil Shakir in my lineup, where Keon, I'm not feeling that way yet. And Keon, after that week 1 performance, obviously was very good in 25 points in week 1, 5, and 7.5 points since then. And so that's not startable. Khalil Shakir, on the other hand, even though he scored touchdowns the last 2 weeks, and that's helped, 14 and 17 points will still put him at 9 to 11 points as his floor. And so I feel like the floor is much higher here with the yak ability that Khalil Shakir has, and you see that demonstrated in the yards that he's put on the stat sheet. And so I feel more comfortable starting Khalil Shakir. And so from an analytics standpoint, we've got him in the same tier. From my gut standpoint, I feel more comfortable starting Shakir than I do Keon Coleman this week. Again, in a matchup full of yellow lights here, it's going to be the D tier for the Bills wide receivers, F tier for Diggs, and then I tier for Kayshon Boutte.
So last matchup of the week, we got Kansas City and Jacksonville. Xavier Worthy, the number 1 wide receiver, before Rasheed is back from that suspension. He'll be in the B tier. He had a great comeback last week, coming back healthy after he missed a couple of weeks. We expect that to continue against Jacksonville. It does get interesting beyond that, though. Hollywood Brown and Tyquan Thornton are the number 2 and 3 wide receivers on the depth chart there. But Hollywood, Thornton, and Juju all had touchdowns last week. Schematically, I would give the upper hand to a guy like Hollywood, where I do think his floor will be a little bit higher. And with Xavier Worthy coming back and Jacksonville having to respect that. Again, last week, Baltimore didn't really know if Worthy was going to be full strength, what he was going to look like. Now we know, again, the threat that he offers in that offense, and then you have the deep threat of Tyquan Thornton. I think Marquise Brown could get a decent amount of targets this week against Jacksonville. I'll list him as a meh. We have him in the F tier. We're going to be conservative. Tyquan Thornton, I'll list as a sit in the G tier. He's very boom bust. Flip side, he got BTJ. I'm still starting BTJ right now. We have him in the C tier. Again, we're ranking him accordingly. We're trying to be conservative with him as well. But his volume has been fine. He just has to take it to the house, very similar to Tet McMillan. 6 and 7 targets the last couple of weeks. Plenty of snap share, 7 and 10 points, plenty of yardage. He's very efficient when he gets those opportunities and those touches. It's just he's got to get some touchdowns here. Travis Hunter will have in the H tier. His volume hasn't really gone up yet. He can have some big plays here and there, but nothing really indicating that he's going to be a comfortable flex option this week.
So there you go. Every wide receiver to start or sit this week. If you'd like to see our full up-to-date rest of season rankings and also our weekly rankings as we update them, you can also plug your team in the My Teams tool for free. You can do so with the link in the pinned comment. Create an account with code DOMAIN. All of that stuff is free, so you can access it. But if you enjoyed the video, please drop a like. Make sure you're subscribed as well. We appreciate you guys so much. Best audience in fantasy football. We'll have this video for running backs out for you tomorrow. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you later.